You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 169. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
One is look in the mirror, and two is have grace on yourself. Honestly look in the mirror and be brave enough, courageous enough to say in a crying out to God way, oh God, I do that. I express that. And then on the other side saying, oh God, have mercy on me and help me to learn to be different.
Today we're having a conversation with Rae Lynn Schlief, and it's all about self-awareness and different seasons of life and ministry. So here's my question to get us started. Yes, there's still questions at the end. What are you learning about yourself in this season of life and ministry? Growing in self-awareness isn't confined to one season of life. So today, as we have a conversation with Rae Lynn, we're going to explore how different life experiences can guide us towards deeper self-awareness, both as leaders and as people of God. So wrap yourself in grace. This episode is an invitation to look in the mirror and pause in prayer as you reflect on your life, your leadership, and ministry. As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast. You're looking for episode 169. Without any further wait, here's our conversation with Rae Lynn.
Well, welcome, Rae Lynn, to LeaderCast. To help our listeners know who you are and what you get paid to do, would you tell us who you are and what you get paid to do?
Sure, that's a great question. I smiled at the what I get paid to do part. I am an ordained pastor in the United Methodist Church here in West Ohio Conference, and I get paid to be the assistant to the district superintendent, which really means I get paid to mentor pastors, to walk alongside of congregations in terms of mission, vision, and values kinds of creative work. I get paid to just walk with people, listen, enjoy conversations, and hopefully bring about the kingdom of God because we get to know each other in better ways and we can serve God in clear ways that grasp our hearts and just throw us out into the work of the world in the kingdom.
Well, what we try to do at LeaderCast is provide insights and resources for courageous leaders. So maybe a good place to start is, what does being a courageous leader mean to you?
Yeah, I think being a courageous leader means to have an honesty and integrity that does not compromise in terms of values, especially critical Christian values, but will lift them up and uphold them and use them in ways in which we read the culture around us, we read the situations around us, we kind of think about where we are in our own lives and in this world and where the church is going. And then we begin to say, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm feeling, here are some of the signs as to what's going on around us and the signs in the direction in which I believe we need to go, and bring people along with us to state those in a very gracious way, but sometimes in a very firm way, especially if we're going to be courageous, but then always to make sure that as we're leading, we have that element of hope.
Well, I like that. As we are talking today, we're going to talk about self-awareness, and we've come up with that because we answer the question, what do courageous leaders need to know, do, or understand? And self-awareness is extremely important. So our focus today will be on self-awareness. So as we continue the conversation, how would you define self-awareness?
I smile at that because I want to just kind of begin with a story. When I was 24 and still in seminary, I was from the Iowa Annual Conference, and the Iowa Annual Conference required all of their students to take clinical pastoral education, CPE. And I have to admit, I mean, I was raised in a really protective home, and my mother pretty much told us how to think and how to believe. And so I enter CPE being very naive, very young, and not very self-aware. So 2 weeks before CPE is over, although I had a strong personality and I was very opinionated, which shouldn't surprise you. And so when CPE was about 2 weeks from being over, I had finished my last verbatim. The group was critiquing the verbatim, and I was making some kind of response. And one of the group members said to me, "Hey, Rae Lynn, I perceive you as being very defensive." To which I said, emphatically, clearly, and loudly, "I am not defensive." And in that moment, I saw what I was. And I saw how other people saw me. To be honest, I actually ended up weeping about it because it was so powerful and so real. And it probably was the best thing that ever happened. I liken it to those moments where people say, I can tell you the first moment that I said yes to Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. I can tell you the first moment I became radically self-aware. And it was in that moment. And so for me, self-awareness is then just always doing that kind of personal check. How am I responding to what's going on around me? What's making me comfortable or what's causing me discomfort? What's going on inside of me when I'm experiencing something or seeing something new for the first time or hearing a conversation or being in a conversation which may or may not be going well, and kind of checking those emotions, those thoughts, those feelings, those attitudes, and beginning to consider, my response back, because self-awareness is that internal working of sense of self and place in world. But then the second part of that is, am I aware then of how my responses impact others, my beliefs, my attitudes? Do I evaluate those? Do I step back and say, yeah, probably shouldn't have said that? Or maybe the force to which I came at that in a conversation with another person was not appropriate. And so it's a both personal, internal, but then that external being very cognizant that my presence also impacts other people in positive and negative ways. And so I guess I would say, by concluding, it's a sense of exposure. Self-awareness is almost a vulnerable sense of exposure where I'm open to seeing myself with more honesty. I'm open to seeing myself as others see me. And hopefully I'm open to seeing myself as God sees me. So there's that vulnerability in it.
I love definitions that are a story because they bring it to life. How do you cultivate self-awareness? Is there anything more that you want to say there?
The only thing I would add, Sarah, is that I learned to begin to risk asking others how they perceive me. And I actually learned to do that in ministry by finding a layperson who I could trust, so that if I was at a meeting and I had gotten maybe a bit pushy or bold, and I kind of read the room and thought, I'm in trouble, or I've done something that's causing a provocation, I would oftentimes afterwards ask a layperson to kind of remain back with me and would ask questions, what was going on? What did I do? So that, because when I was really young, I didn't always discern well. And so I learned the art of risking to ask somebody to give me feedback. Not always comfortable, but necessary.
In your introduction, you said that you're mentoring, you're coaching, you're working with folks in terms of identifying values and then living into those. So how do you help leaders cultivate that self-awareness?
That's a great question, because I really hadn't probably given that intentional thought. I think it's something sometimes we just naturally do, but aren't always aware we're doing that. I have several younger pastors who will call me when they bumped up against something in their local church, an attitude. One of them more recently, something that was put on a Facebook post that made this pastor just angst for a while. And so, I kind of just listen and talk to them about, what did that feel like? Yeah, it kind of seemed like that was inappropriate. How do you think you're going to respond? What might you do? Where's that kind of touching your soul? And then to also remind them gently that any of us who are in pastoral ministry, we kind of like belong to everybody, and people aren't always kind about that. And then just try to help them be aware that it isn't always who they are. Sometimes it's the other person as well. And to be mindful that with any parishioners or anybody we serve, there's another personal agenda going on inside of that person that we may or may not be aware of. And so I at times in my mentoring will say to folks, be mindful, everybody has their own personal agenda. Sometimes it's appropriate when you're feeling that tension to say to the person, is this about me, or is there something else going on in your life? To try to be open about that. But mostly, I mean, it's a listening process and a reflecting back to our colleagues. The most fun happens when they'll say to me, and I've had 2 people in the last several weeks say, would you read or listen to my sermons online and reflect back to me? That's a great opportunity to help somebody cultivate self-awareness, because you can ask questions like, okay, so what are you trying to communicate to your congregation with this text? Did you get it communicated? What held you back from communicating that? Was that some fear you had, or you just quite didn't know how to do that? How do you, when you think about the people you're preaching to in the pew, what's your attitude about those folks? Because sometimes we have attitudes as if, well, they need to hear this. And so, is that really what they need, or is that what you need? And so it's easier in a sense if somebody will risk, putting their message out there to help them reflect more introspectively and some self-awareness just around what it is they're trying to do in the shaping of a sermon.
You do realize you just gave away your secrets.
Oh, when I listen to people preach?
Yeah.
It's amazing, Sarah, because when I believe when people say to us as preachers, how do you know me so well? My response is, I'm preaching to myself. I know myself. I am not unlike anybody else.
So you've set us up well for this next question. Part of that's your self-awareness, and then helping others become self-aware. What mistakes have you witnessed, or what mistakes have you made because of lack of self-awareness?
Way too many. Most of the time when we reflect back on our mistakes, they come out of either a momentary lapse of self-awareness, or we just aren't aware in that moment. And when I thought about this, I recalled a moment early in my years of superintending, and Tim, you might appreciate this, where I had a pastor who called me. I was probably in my end of first, beginning of second year superintending. And he called me because he'd gotten himself in a situation around doing a wedding that was just causing some family concerns with an ex, one of the persons in the wedding party. And when he told me what he had done, I really thought this, and this is terrible. I thought, oh my gosh, how smart can you not be? And I don't know what was going on inside of me, but I proceeded to really take him to task. My tone was judgmental and cutting. I was frustrated. I just couldn't believe that anybody would not think that one through with a little more diligence, especially a clergy colleague. And I tended to be harder on clergy than laity. And I probably treated him fairly miserable. And so we hung up, and about 15 minutes later, I thought, good grief, Rae Lynn, if that didn't come out of your own sense of judgment. And I called him back and I apologized. And that was the only thing I could do. I couldn't fix what I had done, but I could apologize for my behavior.
Which is self-awareness in itself. of coming to
Yeah.
the place of recognizing, I call those the oh crap moments. Oh crap, did I really do that?
And there's no excuse except, I wasn't going to say, oh, I'm sorry, I did this because da 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 da. I mean, then that's not an apology.
Right.
I had to own what was going on inside of me. Because it really wasn't, that conversation was not about him. The conversation about triggered something going on inside of me.
For you, what do those triggers inside of you feel like?
Yeah, that's a great question, because they are actually physical. And I'm glad you asked that, Sarah, because I jokingly said earlier about being defensive, and no, I'm not defensive. And I realized also at the moment that happened, there was a physical thing that had arisen like from my gut and just kind of kept moving up until it like came out of my mouth. And early on in my superintending, and I still do this occasionally, when I know and am aware of a colleague who is a defensive person, and we're in my office or someplace where there's not other people around, I have intentionally tried to trigger that. Not in a pushy, adamant way, but in some question that I know will annoy them enough. And as soon as I do that and I watch their face, I see they're getting defensive, I'll say, okay, just stop right there. And they'll look at me and I'll say, I don't really want you to answer. I want you to tell me, because I said, I can see how defensive you are. And they're like, I said, I want you to tell me how that feels, how that physically feels, and what your response, how you want to respond. And once we do that, then I will say this to them: that will not serve you well in your ministry. Figure out how to check it. Because, to be honest, I'm not as defensive as I was at the age of 24, but I can still go there. I can still feel that. And I think you're right. Being self-aware means being attentive to when those feelings are arising so that we can check them before we get cutting or we do something foolish.
Thanks for going there with me. I've heard some folks describe self-awareness, one, as being aware of our emotions. And so sometimes people feel those in visceral ways, and other times it's more beyond them, but there's still an emotion there that they can identify. And so what you just helped name for folks is part of self-awareness is being able to recognize that and then making the choice about how are you going to respond to that.
Absolutely.
And what's the impact that you want that to have. And all of that happens in a millisecond. In our better moments, we do that. In our not so great moments, we don't.
Before I ask that, I think it's a great gift that you give to pastors to have them come to the place of just becoming self-aware of those feelings. Because my experience has been most people who come to that point either dismiss those or push them down and still react and don't understand why people respond to them the way they respond because they've not been honest with themselves. So I'm grateful to hear that that's part of the work that you do. This next question, when there are people who announce their retirement, I always ask, what brings you to the place of getting ready to retire? And really what's behind that question is selfish for me, because I want to know what you're thinking and feeling when you get to that point. So because I'm at the same place. Well, I think we're close to the same age. So there's some self-awareness there. What goes on to bring you to a place where you say, I've got some other things I want to do, or I'm tired of doing what I'm doing. I know part of your story, so I'm adding things to it. What's the self-awareness that comes to the place of saying it's time to retire?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey to consider retirement, because most of us, when we think about, maybe not most of us, but when I think about retirement, or I've heard people talk about retirement, it's the end of being paid to do the work that you're doing kind of thing, if we're just going to be, in the world about that, and so for me, there is that sense that, I've been in ministry. I will have been in ministry for 40 years by the time July 1, 2021 rolls around. And it's not so much that I'm just done and I want out. I can't retire to nothing. It was more of a journey of what I'm doing, how I'm serving, what is creating me to want to step back or away from all of that has really kind of hinged on not being fulfilled. Now, that's not to say that I won't be faithful to the work and ministry that God has called me to in the district, and to supporting and walking with Scott, Oki, in terms of the Maumee Watershed District. But this has been going on in my soul for 3 years. My mother lived with me the year of fall of 2017 until fall of 2018. My mother and my sister, because of my mother's dementia. And it was already beginning to work on me at that point in time, because I had this restlessness. Although my mother's dementia journey was a phenomenal journey in new self-awareness, and especially awareness with a mother who was so controlling of us. And I had chosen to live my life so differently and away from that to have her in my home was a time of grace. And while I was still restless, there was a new learning going on, and an affirmation of all that I had learned and taken in, probably around my own self-awareness, that I could take in my mom, who had been, in a sense, a difficult part of my life, and welcome her in and find, for the first time in many years, a joy in being able to just take care of somebody, my mother, who would never let us take care of her, would never receive anything from us. And she had no choice but to be able to do that as gift. And so that was kind of the beginning of this restlessness, and knowing that I wanted something different. God was moving me in a new way. There had been some healing that had happened in my life because of that year of her living in my home, and my sister as well. And then after she died, there was a period of, now what? Would I be more satisfied if I said to Scott, put me back in a local church? No, partly because while folks will say to me, you're a really good preacher, people don't understand the angst that I go through to prepare for that message and to preach it. And there's a part of me after all these years that I don't handle that well physically or emotionally. I just don't. It's too much angst. And so I said, no, I can't do that. That's not going to work. I'm not going to ever retire to nothing. And so I just began to pray. Hey, Lord, I'm feeling pretty much done at what's going on in my life of ministry right now, but I'm not done serving you. I mean, I can't ever think that there'd be a time where I would just not be involved in some way. And part of my journey about with all of this to both of you has been the cultural coaching piece at the West Ohio Conference, invited me to become trained in. My eyes were opened again. You want to talk about a different kind of self-awareness? Start doing cultural coaching and start looking at systemic issues and racism and all that stuff. And it just began to emerge that I had another calling post 40 years in local church and district work, and now into issues around polarization and racism, and how do I take what probably is one of my best gifts, and that is I just enjoy being in relationship with people and letting God work through me in that way, and not having to do it after all the hours of working in the district or a local church, but being able to have the freedom to do it any and every hour of the day as it's offered to me. Does that answer your question? That's kind of how I came to the decision of it. It's a freeing. And for me, it's going to be play. It's going to be difficult. It's hard to work with polarized people. It's hard to work in issues of racism and those other isms, but it's going to be play.
So what I hear, and I'm projecting, but what I hear is you're not retiring from a call. It's just being redirected.
Yes, Tim, I have been called into something new, and I feel like I did when I loaded up my AMC Pacer in 1979 and drove to seminary. That's how I feel. And I haven't felt that way in a long time.
What a gift to be able to know the next thing that you are moving on to.
Here's where I'm self-aware, Sarah. I don't have a lot of patience. So I'm walking into something that's going to push me to have patience. And so I pray every day to God, Lord, I need patience, or at least show me how to fake it.
I want to go back to the journey that you just described, because along that journey from your mom and your sister being with you, your mother's death to this day, there were lots of moments of self-awareness, of you pausing to ask, okay, what is next? God, what are you doing here? What do you need me to do? And you gave us some of those markers. What wisdom, and it might not be that folks are experiencing, a sibling and a parent living with them, but those refining moments that are often grace-filled, what wisdom would you offer to folks in terms of holding up the mirror of self-awareness as you're going through? This is so inarticulate. I don't know what to call it other than going through something.
Yeah, wow, what wisdom. I think two things. They're kind of opposite sides of the same coin. One is look in the mirror. And two is have grace on yourself. Honestly look in the mirror and be brave enough, courageous enough to say in a crying out to God way, oh God, I do that. I express that. And then on the other side saying, oh God, have mercy on me and help me to learn to be different.
That's a very good word. Thank you.
Rae Lynn, what's the best wisdom that you can share with leaders about self-awareness?
I think my response, and again, this is going to come out of my own personal way of how I gained some of my own self-awareness. I would say find somebody who you trust and be courageous. Be courageous about asking others that you trust how they perceive you. Most of us cannot see ourselves outside of ourselves. And so the only way we see ourselves is when we ask another person to reflect who they see us as being. And that's asking them, maybe you've just led a meeting or preached a message, or somebody has been with you, like another person from the church, another visitor from the church in a hospital setting, and they've watched you work with somebody and listen to them and offer prayer. Just be bold enough to say, I'd like some feedback. How did I handle that? What could I do different? What did you see going on? It could be that you've had an argument with somebody, and a couple days later you say, hey, can I have some feedback from that? So it's actually about being bold and asking for perceptions of others and how and what they see of us, and to not quickly dismiss either positive or negative. We're not just looking for positive, we're not just looking for negative. It's kind of it is a both and, but don't be too quick to dismiss it and bristle, but then to become aware of that, to take it into one's soul, to reflect, to ask God to lead us and shape us into new ways and being and new experiences, to trust that God will do that with us and for us, and to just, again, get brave. So only other people can help us do that. We can't become completely self-aware without others. It's not so unlike when I was married. My husband saying to me one day when we were arguing, he said, well, Rae Lynn, your words say one thing, but your tone says something else. Okay. there's a reflection. And he was right. I always liked myself better when I wasn't married. But
And that's
I like
self-awareness.
myself more now because I was married and I learned so much.
You have given our listeners a lot to think about and a lot to reflect on. And so at this point, I just want to say to the folks that are listening, hit pause throughout this episode or go back. And as you heard Rae Lynn sharing a story or that nugget of wisdom, take that moment of self-awareness and practice what we're talking about here. Don't just listen to us. Practice it. That's my invitation for you today, but there's still going to be 2 questions at the end of this episode. So are you ready for the rapid fire questions?
I guess. I'm not prepared, but I'm ready.
You don't have to prepare for these.
Rae Lynn, what's your favorite meal to eat out?
Oh my gosh. J. Alexander's steak, baked potatoes, and salad, Caesar salad.
What do people misunderstand about you?
Then I'm really an introvert and not an extrovert.
What Netflix series, movie, or TV show have you binge watched recently?
Oh, there you go. I just finished The Crown and I binged watched The Bridgertons.
What are you reading right now?
I'm reading a book called Until We Reckon, which is about incarceration. I just finished one on white privilege, and I'm reading a book on coaching.
What's bringing you joy these days?
I have a dog that he looks like a miniature shepherd. He's 45 pounds, and he likes to jump on my deck because there are rabbits that live under my deck. And he jumps about 4 feet high. He's got springs in his feet. And so every day he does this several times a day. Whenever I put him out, he bounds and bounces around my deck. And lo and behold, a rabbit will shoot out one end of the deck. And he's learned, because I've told him he can't chase them and jump the fence, he's learned to just stand there and watch them race across my yard.
He actually goes out, jumps to make the rabbits run so he can watch them.
Yeah, he does. And it's the funny, I've got video of it. It's the funniest thing. I mean, he jumps high. He sniffs them and then he jumps where they're at until he harasses them so much that they shoot out the end of the deck.
Rae Lynn, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to spend a little bit of time with us and share your wisdom and insights about self-awareness, along with some laughter. I am grateful for you and for your ministry, and celebrate your next calling and where God's leading you after July 1 to be in ministry with the next group of people that God's calling you to be with. So before I turn to Tim and ask him a similar question, is there any last word that you would like to offer our listeners, either around self-awareness, around leadership?
I think my only last word would be to be attentive to the journey, but enjoy the journey. Make sure you fill it with a lot of joy.
Tim, any last words?
Rae Lynn, I don't know that my words would ever express how grateful I am for you and for the impact you've had on my life. And that's really been especially over the last few months, and I'm extremely grateful. And part of what I've heard you talk about today in terms of self-awareness is risking vulnerability and then learning in the midst of that risk. And I think that's a true gift to anyone who's willing to take the risk. And I'm grateful for what you've offered today. And I hope people who have, I'll quote somebody I follow, all those who have ears, let them hear.
That's a good quote.
It's a really good quote.
Thank you, Tim. And to be honest, just the last few months of other ways in which the three of us have journeyed, this has been fun, and I have deep and great appreciation for who each of you are. And oh my goodness, isn't it wonderful that we all have different gifts, and together we're the ones who piece and build and knit and create and work alongside of God in Christ in this kingdom building. And thank you.
Amen.
I think there'll be ways that I'll figure out how to work with you more. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rae Lynn. So, are you looking in the mirror and wrapping yourself in grace? That was one of Rae Lynn's invitations. Here are the reflection questions for this week, and I have 4 of them for you this week. The first one is this: who do you see when you look in the mirror? Number 2, what are you learning about yourself in this season of life and ministry? Number 3, what are your triggers? And if you don't know, have a conversation with a trusted friend. And finally, number 4, what is God calling you to in this season of life? As a reminder, you can find these 4 questions along with show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast, or you can go directly to this episode at transformingmission.org/169. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.